Have you ever spoken and then immediately wished the ground would open up and swallow you whole? I know I have many times. It's almost like your mouth has a mind of its own, and before your brain even realizes what's happening, your words are already out there, dancing in the air, leaving chaos in their wake. And then comes the regret, that awkward moment when you think, why did I even say that? The truth is, every word we speak has energy. Words are not just sounds, they are vibrations. They can build someone up, inspire them, or crush them completely. They can create opportunities or destroy relationships in a heartbeat. And here's the subtle thing. Once words are spoken, you can't take them back. No matter how much you apologize, that moment has been imprinted. That impact has been made. That energy has been released into the world. And that is why thinking before you speak is not just advice. It is a life skill, a spiritual practice, and a form of personal power. Let me tell you a small story. There was once a young man who was very intelligent, but had a habit of speaking without thinking. One day, during a meeting at his office, he noticed a colleague struggling with a presentation. Without thinking, he blurted out, "That's completely wrong. You're missing the point." Everyone went silent, and the colleague looked down, embarrassed. Later, the young man realized that not only had he hurt someone's feelings, but he had also damaged his own reputation. People started noticing that he was sharp, yes, but also harsh. His words had power, but he had used them carelessly. Now, I want you to pause for a second and reflect. How many times in your own life have you said something in anger, frustration, or even excitement, only to realize later that it wasn't necessary at all? Maybe it was a comment to a friend, a reply to a family member, or even something on social media, and yet those words lingered. They changed dynamics, hurt feelings, or left a mark that could not be erased. This is why thinking before you speak is not about holding back your voice. It's about giving your voice wisdom, giving your words weight, and giving your energy purpose. Think about it this way: your brain is like a filter, and your words are like water flowing through a pipe. If the filter is blocked, all the dirt, all the negativity, all the impulsive reactions come rushing out. But if the filter is strong, clear, and thoughtful, only pure, meaningful words reach the world. And isn't that what we want? To leave behind words that add value, that uplift, that inspire, rather than words that scatter regret and hurt. One of the simplest ways to practice this is to pause before responding. Even a short pause, 2, 3, 5 seconds, can make a huge difference. Those few seconds allow your mind to weigh the impact of your words. Ask yourself, is this necessary? Is this kind? Is this true? If the answer to any of these is no, then perhaps the silence is more powerful than your speech. Remember, silence is not weakness. Silence is wisdom in its purest form. And in those moments when you resist the urge to speak hastily, you are not suppressing yourself, you are practicing self-mastery. I want to share another small story from my own life. There was a time when someone criticized me in public. My first instinct, as always, was to defend myself immediately, to justify, to argue. But something inside me paused, and in that pause, I realized that my reaction could escalate the situation or create more conflict. I took a deep breath, chose my words carefully, and responded not with anger but with calmness. You know what happened? The person softened, the tension disappeared, and what could have been a conflict became a moment of understanding, all because I chose to think before I spoke. When we speak without thinking, we give away our power. But when we speak with awareness, we create influence, respect, and trust. Every great teacher, every spiritual guide, every wise person you've ever admired, what sets them apart is not just their knowledge, but their ability to choose words carefully. They understand that words are like arrows. Once released, they reach their target. And some arrows, once shot, can never be recalled. So, the next time you feel that rush to respond, pause. Let your words marinate. Give them intention. Ask yourself, will these words help? Will they heal? Will they inspire? Or will they hurt, confuse, or escalate? And if the answer is unclear, remember that sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in saying nothing at all. Thinking before speaking is more than a habit. It's a philosophy. It's a way to honor yourself, others, and the energy you bring into the world. It's a reminder that your words are sacred tools, not weapons to be wielded carelessly. And when you begin to practice this consciously, slowly but surely, you'll notice a transformation. Conversations become calmer, relationships become deeper, and even your inner peace begins to flourish. So, my friends, let's make a pact today, not to speak impulsively, not to react without thought, but to let our words carry weight, meaning, and kindness. Because in the end, it is not the quantity of our words that matters, but the quality. And when we master the art of thinking before speaking, we master one of life's most powerful and beautiful skills. Have you ever noticed that the most powerful people in the world aren't always the ones who speak the most? In fact, many times, the most influential individuals are the ones who speak the least. There's a certain magic, a certain aura in someone who can remain silent when everyone else is talking. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is not weakness. Silence, my friends, is a superpower that we often underestimate because in a world full of noise, the ability to be quiet is revolutionary. Let me tell you something I have observed over the years. When someone is talking too much, we often stop listening. But when someone says very little, suddenly every word they speak feels heavier, more meaningful, and more impactful. Silence, you see, gives space. It creates curiosity. It makes people lean in. It makes them listen. And it gives them room to think. That is why sometimes the person who says nothing in a meeting or a discussion is the person whose words, when finally spoken, carry the most weight. Now I know many of you are thinking, but silence can be awkward. Silence can make people uncomfortable. Silence can seem like we are weak or uninvolved. Yes, sometimes silence may feel awkward, especially in our culture where talking is equated with doing or words are mistaken for action. But here's the truth. Not every moment requires a response. Not every opinion needs to be voiced. Not every conflict needs a comment. And the person who understands that, who chooses silence wisely, possesses a strength that words alone cannot create. I remember a story from my own life. I was once in a discussion with a friend, and it became heated. Both of us wanted to prove a point. My instinct was, as always, to respond immediately, to defend myself, to clarify. But then I paused. I remembered something a mentor once told me. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. So I stayed quiet, I listened. And in that silence, something amazing happened. My friend, who was initially defensive and angry, began to open up. He started explaining his feelings, his perspective, and slowly the tension dissolved. My silence created space for understanding, space for empathy, and space for resolution. That day, I learned firsthand the transformative power of silence. Silence also gives you clarity. When we are constantly speaking, reacting, and expressing, our minds become clouded with noise, noise of our own thoughts, noise of other people's opinions, noise of the world around us. But when we practice silence, when we pause, when we step back from the urge to comment or criticize, something beautiful happens. We begin to hear ourselves. We begin to connect with our inner voice. We begin to see situations clearly without the distortion of ego or impulse. And from that clarity, we can choose words, actions, and responses that are truly aligned with wisdom and purpose. Another beautiful aspect of silence is its ability to heal. Sometimes people speak words that hurt, that wound, that scar, and sometimes in response, we feel the urge to counterattack, to defend ourselves, to explain. But silence can heal faster than words ever could. Silence communicates patience, composure, and strength. It shows that we are not controlled by the situation or by the emotions of the moment. It demonstrates self-mastery. It says to the world, I am aware, I am centered, and I do not need to react impulsively. And silence also teaches others. Have you noticed how children, students, or even colleagues often mirror the energy of those around them? When you speak impulsively, they speak impulsively. When you react emotionally, they react emotionally. But when you practice silence, when you show restraint and thoughtfulness, they begin to observe, they begin to reflect, and they begin to learn. Your silence becomes a lesson in patience, in wisdom, in emotional intelligence. Here's something even more profound. Silence is not just about holding your tongue. It is about cultivating an inner calm, a sense of presence, a mindfulness that allows you to act rather than react. It's about recognizing that the world does not need your immediate commentary on everything. It's about realizing that energy, intention, and awareness can travel farther than words. And it's about understanding that in many cases, saying nothing can create a greater impact than speaking everything on your mind. Of course, silence is not always easy. It requires courage. It requires discipline. It requires a deep trust that the world will respect you even if you do not shout, argue, or dominate the conversation. It requires patience to sit with discomfort, to allow others to speak, and to resist the urge to fill every gap with words. But once you practice it, once you begin to experience it, you realize that silence is not a limitation. It is a liberation. It frees you from unnecessary drama, impulsive decisions, and conflicts that could have been avoided with a simple pause. So, my friends, I encourage you to see silence not as absence, but as presence, not as emptiness, but as power, not as weakness, but as wisdom. Begin with small steps. Pause before responding. Listen more than you speak. Observe more than you react. And notice how this quiet strength transforms your relationships, your decisions, and your life. Because the greatest superpower we can cultivate is not the ability to speak more, but the ability to know when to remain silent, and in that silence, to create more impact than words ever could. Have you ever noticed how quickly gossip spreads? One small comment, One tiny story, and suddenly it's everywhere, twisting, turning, growing bigger than it ever was. And yet, despite knowing this, many of us participate in it without thinking. We listen, we repeat, we embellish, and often we don't even realize the damage we're doing. Gossip and negativity are like invisible poison. They may seem harmless at the moment, even entertaining, but over time, they erode trust, relationships, and our own peace of mind. I remember a story from my early days. I was part of a group where everyone loved sharing news about each other, real or imagined. One day, I heard something about a friend. My first instinct was curiosity, just like everyone else. I repeated it, perhaps thinking it was harmless. But what happened? That comment started a ripple. Misunderstandings arose. Relationships got strained. My friend felt betrayed. And in that moment, I realized that words, once spoken, are like seeds. Some seeds blossom into flowers, and some seeds grow into thorns that prick and hurt. And gossip is always a thorn. Negativity works in the same way. How often do we complain about situations, criticize others, or focus on problems rather than solutions? Sometimes we think venting will make us feel better, but what actually happens is that negativity becomes contagious. It changes our energy, our mindset, and even the way people perceive us. You see, the energy we carry is not isolated. It radiates. When you engage in gossip or negative talk, you may not notice it immediately, but slowly it begins to shape your thoughts, your emotions, and even your relationships. Avoiding gossip and negativity is not about judging others or pretending everything is perfect. It's about choosing to bring positivity into your life instead of feeding the fire of destruction. Imagine a room filled with people talking constantly about others' mistakes, weaknesses, or failures. The room feels heavy, tense, and uncomfortable. Now imagine a room where people speak with encouragement, kindness, and constructive energy. The difference is palpable. That is the power of avoiding gossip. It changes the atmosphere, it changes the energy, and it changes you. Let me share another story to make this clearer. There was a woman I knew who worked in a corporate office. She made it a point never to gossip. If a conversation started turning negative about a colleague, she quietly excused herself or changed the topic. People noticed. They started coming to her for advice, for guidance, for a listening ear, because they realized she was trustworthy. They knew whatever they said would not be repeated, twisted, or used against them. She built respect, trust, and influence, not by being loud or opinionated, but by exercising the quiet strength of staying away from gossip and negativity. Gossip and negative talk not only affect others, they also affect us internally. When we speak ill of someone, we carry that energy inside. It weighs on us, even if we don't notice it immediately. Our mind becomes cluttered, our emotions become restless, and slowly, our own sense of peace begins to fade. When we choose to avoid gossip, we free ourselves from this burden. We give our mind space to focus on what truly matters: growth, kindness, empathy, and purpose. Here's a subtle point. Many people miss gossip often hides insecurity. When someone talks negatively about another person, it's often because they are trying to feel superior, to mask their own fears, or to belong. But participating in this cycle does not uplift us, it drags us down. Choosing to avoid gossip, to refrain from negative talk, is actually a reflection of inner strength. It says, I am confident enough in myself not to bring others down. I am strong enough to stay above unnecessary chatter, and that strength is rare and deeply respected. Another beautiful aspect of avoiding gossip is that it allows us to build authentic relationships. People instinctively trust those who don't talk behind their backs. They feel safe, they feel valued, and in life, trust and authenticity are far more powerful than superficial chatter. You may have hundreds of acquaintances who share news about others, but the few people who never gossip, who speak only with honesty, integrity, and care, are the ones who matter. Those are the relationships that endure, that bring joy, and that create a sense of security in a world that often feels unpredictable. Now, I am not saying that staying silent is always the answer. Sometimes you must speak up for truth, for justice, or to guide someone. But even then, your words must be intentional, constructive, and kind, not fueled by gossip or negativity. There is a difference between addressing an issue with purpose and participating in idle talk. One builds, the other destroys. So, my friends, the next time you hear a story about someone, pause. Ask yourself, do I need to share this? Will it uplift or harm? Am I contributing to positivity or negativity? And if the answer is not clear, perhaps the best response is to say nothing at all. Because every time you resist the urge to gossip, every time you choose not to spread negativity, you are protecting not only others but yourself. You are cultivating inner peace, building trust, and creating an energy around you that attracts goodness rather than chaos. In the end, avoiding gossip and negativity is not just about behavior, it's about mindset. It is about becoming someone whose words heal, inspire, and encourage rather than harm. It is about understanding that the energy we release into the world comes back to us, often magnified. And it is about realizing that the greatest form of respect we can show to others and to ourselves is to speak with integrity, care, and consciousness. So let us make a conscious choice today to step away from gossip, to resist negativity, and to become people whose words carry light, love, and wisdom. In doing so, we not only transform our relationships and our environment, but also transform ourselves into individuals of strength, integrity, and grace. Anger, it's one of the most powerful emotions we carry, and yet one of the most destructive if left unchecked. I want to ask you something. How many times have you reacted in anger and later regretted it? I know I have. In those moments, it feels justified. In those moments, it feels like the only way to express ourselves, to protect ourselves, to make our point heard. But here's the truth. Anger is a fire. A little warmth can be comforting, but an uncontrolled blaze can destroy everything around it, including ourselves. Think about this. When we are angry, our mind narrows. Our vision becomes tunnel-like. We see only the offense, the hurt, the insult, the trigger. Our thoughts become loud, impulsive, and often irrational. In that state, our words, if spoken, can wound deeply. They can break trust, damage relationships, and leave scars that take years to heal. And once those words leave our mouth, once that action is taken in anger, it cannot be taken back. That is why managing anger is not just a nice thing to do. It is essential for our peace, our relationships, and our very character. I remember a story about a man I once met. He was known for his brilliance, his talent, and his insights. But he also had a terrible temper. A small mistake at work could set him off, and when he lost his temper, even the people closest to him would feel the impact. One day, after a particularly harsh outburst, he looked around at the silence, the hurt faces, and realized that his anger had cost him more than just words. It had cost him trust, respect, and peace. That day he made a conscious decision to master his anger rather than be mastered by it. And slowly over time, he learned that anger, when transformed, can become a guide rather than a weapon. Anger itself is not the enemy. Anger is a signal. It tells us that something is wrong, that our boundaries are being crossed, or that we feel hurt. The danger lies in how we respond to that anger. The first step in managing anger is awareness, recognizing it as it arises. Take a moment to feel it, name it, understand it. Say to yourself, I am angry. I feel this because awareness allows us to pause instead of immediately reacting. And in that pause lies the opportunity for transformation. One of the simplest and most effective tools for anger management is breathing. It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But when anger rises, our body tenses, our heart races, and our mind floods with thoughts. Taking a few deep breaths can physically calm the body, giving the mind space to think clearly. I often tell people, imagine your anger is like a storm. You cannot stop the storm from coming, but you can choose to wait it out, to observe it, and to act only when the sky clears. Breathing is the anchor that keeps you steady during the storm. Another tool is perspective. Often, when we are angry, we inflate the situation in our minds. We exaggerate the offense, replay it endlessly, and allow it to dominate our thoughts. But when we step back and ask ourselves, will this matter in a year? Will this matter in a week? Will this matter tomorrow? We begin to see how small many of our triggers truly are. Perspective turns the fire of anger into a manageable flame, something that can guide us rather than consume us. Humor, surprisingly, is another ally in managing anger. If we can learn to laugh at the absurdity of a situation, at our own pride, at the mistakes of life, anger loses its grip. Humor shifts the energy, relaxes the mind, and reminds us that life is bigger than this single moment of irritation. Forgiveness, both for others and for ourselves, is a deeper layer of anger management. Holding on to anger is like carrying a heavy stone in your pocket. It weighs you down, strains your spirit, and prevents you from moving freely. Forgiveness doesn't mean you condone the hurt or the offense. It doesn't mean you let people walk over you. Forgiveness simply frees your own heart. It allows you to move forward with clarity, peace, and strength. I want to share a small, personal moment. There was someone who deeply hurt me, someone whose actions could have made me angry for a long time. I remember feeling that fire rise inside me, wanting to retaliate, wanting to make them understand the hurt they caused. But I paused. I took a deep breath. I asked myself, what will my reaction create? Will it heal or harm? And in that pause, I chose silence and reflection over reaction. Not only did it preserve my peace, but it also allowed me to approach the situation with wisdom later, rather than with the chaos of anger. Anger management, my friends, is ultimately about self-mastery. It is about realizing that the energy of anger can be channeled constructively rather than destructively. When mastered, anger can fuel courage, action, and change. When uncontrolled, It can destroy relationships, reputations, and even our own health. The choice is ours. Will we be slaves to our anger, or will we become masters of it? So the next time you feel anger rising, poise, breathe, observe, reflect, ask yourself, is this worth reacting to? Will this reaction create peace or chaos? Will my words heal or hurt? And if you must act, let it be from clarity, not impulse, from wisdom, not ego, from love, not fear. Because mastering anger is not about suppressing emotions, it is about transforming them. And when we learn to transform our anger into awareness, patience, and purposeful action, we unlock a power within us far greater than any momentary outburst could ever give. Have you ever noticed that some people have the remarkable ability to make everyone around them feel heard, valued, and understood? And yet, these people don't usually dominate conversations or speak the loudest. In fact, many of them speak very little, but when they do, their words carry weight. Why? Because they have mastered one of the most underrated skills in life, the art of listening. Listening is not just a social skill. It is a form of leadership, a practice of empathy, and a gateway to understanding the world and the people around us in a way that words alone can never achieve. I want you to think about your own experiences. How often have you felt truly heard? How often has someone listened to you, not just with their ears, but with their heart? Those moments are rare, and yet they are deeply impactful. They leave a lasting impression. When someone listens with genuine attention, something magical happens. They validate your feelings, acknowledge your presence, and communicate respect without uttering a single judgmental word. That is the power of listening. Let me share a story from my own life. There was a colleague I worked with who was extremely talented, but he often felt undervalued and overlooked. One day, I noticed he seemed frustrated and withdrawn, so I simply asked, "Would you like to talk?" I didn't give advice. I didn't offer solutions. I simply listened. I let him share his thoughts, his struggles, and his ideas uninterrupted. By the end of the conversation, he felt lighter, empowered, and even inspired. That moment taught me something fundamental. Listening is a gift, and giving someone that gift can transform their day, their perspective, and even their life. Many people underestimate listening because they confuse it with silence. Silence can be a part of listening, yes, but listening is far more active than simply not speaking. Listening is about being fully present. It's about tuning in, not just to the words, but to the emotions, the intentions, and even the unspoken messages behind the words. It requires attention, patience, and humility. And this, my friends, is what makes listening a leadership skill. Leaders who truly listen gain insight that others miss. They understand what motivates people, what challenges they face, and what dreams they hold. And with this understanding, they can guide, inspire, and lead with wisdom rather than authority. Here's another important aspect: listening builds trust. When people feel heard, they feel valued, they feel safe, they are more willing to open up, to share ideas, and even to admit mistakes. And trust, my friends, is the foundation of all meaningful relationships, personal, professional, or spiritual. Without listening, trust falters. With listening, it flourishes. A leader who listens doesn't just command respect, they earn it. Let me also address a subtle trap we all fall into: listening with the intent to respond, rather than to understand. How many times have you been in a conversation where your mind is already forming your reply while the other person is speaking? You are hearing the words, yes, but you are not truly listening. You are preparing an argument, a correction, or a story instead of focusing entirely on the other person. This is the biggest barrier to effective listening. True listening requires humility, the humility to step aside, to quiet your own mind, and to be present entirely for someone else. I remember observing a great teacher once. He rarely interrupted anyone. He asked questions, nodded thoughtfully, and often remained silent after someone spoke, giving them space to think further. And when he finally spoke, his words were precise, thoughtful, and impactful. People listened not because they had to, but because they respected the depth of his understanding. And that depth came not from speaking more, but from listening more. Listening also cultivates empathy. When you genuinely listen, you begin to see the world through someone else's eyes. You feel their struggles, their joys, their fears. And this understanding transforms how you respond. You are no longer reactive or judgmental. You respond with compassion, with insight, and with wisdom. Leadership at its core is about influencing and inspiring others. And how can you inspire someone if you do not understand them? Listening is the bridge between influence and understanding. Another subtle benefit of listening is that it teaches patience. In a world that moves so fast, we are often in a hurry to speak, to react, to solve. But listening slows us down. It forces us to pause, to absorb, and to reflect. And in that pause, clarity emerges. Solutions emerge, wisdom emerges. A leader who listens is not reactive. They are thoughtful, intentional, and deliberate. And finally, listening is transformative not just for the speaker, but for the listener as well. When you listen deeply, you expand your perspective. You gain insights you could never have imagined. You learn lessons from experiences that are not your own. You grow in emotional intelligence, in patience, in compassion, and in understanding. And this growth, my friends, is the essence of leadership, not the title you hold, not the authority you command, but the ability to connect, inspire, and elevate others. So today, I encourage you to embrace listening as a superpower, not only for your relationships, but for your own growth. The next time someone speaks to you, resist the urge to respond immediately. Resist the urge to interrupt. Resist the urge to judge. Instead, focus entirely on them. Hear the words, feel the emotions, understand the intention. And when it is your turn to speak, let your words reflect that understanding. Because leadership is not just about giving instructions or taking charge. Leadership is about listening, truly listening, and creating a space where others feel valued, seen, and heard. And when you practice this, you discover something beautiful. In listening, you gain far more than words could ever give you. You gain connection, respect, trust, and the ability to lead with both heart and wisdom.